Welcome to the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring intimate conversations with emerging and established musicians, recorded at the Gaslight Studios in St. Louis. And now your host, Aaron Perlin. Welcome back to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Perlin. As always, we are presented by Shynesty and Wellbeing Brewing. Today we are joined by American Aquarium frontman BJ Barham. BJ, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
It's exciting to have you in town. I know I've been trying to talk to your people for a year and a half now to try to get you on the show. So I'm really excited to have you on. I'm a big fan of your music, and you kind of fit into a genre that seems to be exploding, even though inexplicably there's really no place for it on mainstream radio.
Yeah, there's zero place for us on mainstream radio.
Yeah, I mean outside of serious outlaw country. So, you know, the way we typically do the loadout is I want to hear about your story. And I know, you live in Raleigh. I know you put the band together in about 2006, and you guys have had this slow growth over the years since then. And you've also had a number of lineup changes, especially in 2017. But I'd like to go back before then. I'm curious about just how you kind of got into music. What was your, what influenced you? When did you start playing music? What were the drivers for you?
I was in college. I was always a musical kid. I was in choir. I was a theater kid. Always enjoyed performing. I just never started. I never wrote songs. I never played a guitar or anything. When I got to college, I bought a cheap Takamine guitar. Taught myself a couple chords. And pretty soon I was writing songs. It was just kind of went hand in hand. Once I learned how to play G, C, and D, I started putting words over top of pretty simple chord progressions. Wrote a bunch of really, really terrible songs. And then I started writing some not so terrible songs. Started playing at venues, coffee houses, anywhere that would have me. Eventually people that weren't my friends told me that the songs were good or that they liked the songs. And so that gave me a little bit more faith in my songwriting. And just, I dove head first, treated it like a job from the jump. I treated it like a craft. I wanted to get better at it. Every day I wanted to be better. Every day I wanted to write 6 songs and get better than I was the day before. So I probably did that for about a year, just writing and writing and writing and trying to develop a voice. But even the first couple records were just these kind of pale imitations of my heroes, which at the time were Dylan and Springsteen and Paul Simon and Neil Young and Whiskey Town and the Drive-By Truckers. And it was kind of an amalgamation of all the stuff I was really listening to in my late teens, early 20s, until I finally, got confident enough to where I was like, I can play for an hour original songs, and I'm proud of these songs. And then I realized that it's very hard to play in a bar with just an acoustic guitar. So I realized I needed a band. So I recruited, I lovingly refer to them as owner-operators. Like if I had a friend that played drums, he was my drummer for a week. If I had a friend that owned a bass guitar, he was my bass player. And we kind of had this like really kind of rough and tumble versions of the band early on. It was just nobody stayed for longer than 6 months. We played a couple shows, and once they realized that I was getting more serious about it and wanting to tour more, they didn't see themselves going in that direction. So it was about eventually finding a group of people I could talk into touring on the weekends. And after that, it was about finding a group of people I could talk into touring nonstop, years at a time. And so 15 years later, 46 members later, here we are.
What was the point where you finally found that group of people that could make the same kind of commitment you were ready to make?
It would have been 2008, 2009. So the band started in 2006. So those first 2 years were pretty tumultuous. We were going through members every couple months. And it wasn't like a personality difference. It was just a commitment difference. It was, hey man, like I'm going to school to be a doctor. I'm going to school to be, an accountant. I like playing music, but I don't want to do this for a living. I don't want to go broke doing this. Eventually, I talked a group of guys into going broke for a decade and just playing music together. So I would say that started around the record Dances for the Lonely. I put together a band for Dances for the Lonely, and 3 of the guys that played on Dances for the Lonely ended up playing with me all the way through 2015's Wolves.
Okay.
So a good 6 or 7 years, I had 3 of those guys still in the band, the core of the band, which core of the band I considered then was Bill Corbin, Ryan Johnson, and Whit Wright, bass, guitar, and pedal steel, respectively. So I kept a pretty good lineup together from 2008 to 2015. And then in 2017, the entire band quit.
Yeah.
Everybody walked away from it. And I was left with a decision. Stop American Aquarium and continue doing BJ Barham. I had put out a solo record in 2016. It was the logical step for me just to be like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna go solo. But I sat down and had a talk with my wife, and I was like, I wrote all the songs. It wasn't like a collaborative thing. It was, I wrote the songs. Every single song that you've ever heard on an American Aquarium record, I wrote it. So as long as I want to play these songs, I can play them. They're my songs. And I underestimated how easy it would be to find a group of musicians that wanted to tour the country playing music for a living. I thought that I had to have a bunch of kids from Raleigh, and it turns out I was able to go outside of Raleigh and recruit some of the best musicians I've ever met in my life. I went to Austin, Nashville, Atlanta, and got really great players that shared my vision, shared the commitment, but also, I got along with. I hadn't spent 10 years burning them out. They were fresh, and when most of these guys came on, touring it got pretty easy for us.
Did you find when you were looking to recreate the band that did you take the Jimmy Buffett road in that allegedly Buffett on his own is an okay musician and he works very hard to surround himself with people that he knows are better than he is.
Of course.
So he has an extraordinary surrounding cast.
Yeah, I'm not a guitar player by any means. I didn't learn how to be a guitar player. I'm a songwriter that plays guitars simply to facilitate songwriting. My songwriting is just as good as anybody that's ever played guitar in this band. Guitar player versus songwriter. Songwriting's my thing that I bring to the table. I happen to play acoustic guitar to facilitate the songs. So it's about finding a guitar player that I think is as good as my songs are.
Yeah.
And I like to surround myself with not just capable musicians, but inspiring musicians. People that when we get in a room together, something special happens. They're not just playing along to the song. They're adding their own element to the song. That's a good feeling.
So I'm curious because I've been in the same situation, and what I do is I end up writing the melodies and the general rhythm for the song, but I don't write the individual parts for, say, the lead guitar, for percussion, for bass. Are you finding yourself writing each and every individual piece of it, or are you writing simply, here's the melody of the song, here's the lyrics of the song, the composition, and then bring it to your bandmates who then are adding different pieces around?
Yeah, I'm not a drummer, so I don't tell my drummer how to drum. I'm not a bass player. I don't tell my bass player how to write bass lines. I bring them these skeletal versions of songs. They're completed songs.
Yeah.
The chord progression is there, the melody's there, the lyrics are there. I let them make those decisions.
They're songs that you could go play in a bar by yourself.
Exactly, 100%. Every song you hear on any one of our records, I can sit down and play it on an acoustic guitar, and it's still the same song. Yeah. But I really enjoy playing with a band. Like I bring the bones. They put the flesh and the meat and the fun stuff on it. But at the end of the day, I can sit down on somebody's couch and play those songs, and they're the same songs.
It's interesting. I've spent a lot of time on your social media.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot of bands, it's not members of the band that are operating. It's some PR person.
Yeah.
I get the sense that it's you who are behind a lot of your social media channels. It's your story, you're talking about, and you tend to share this kind of unadulterated joy of playing with your band and playing music.
Yeah. I run all of our socials.
Yeah.
I run Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I answer all the emails. I run our store, our online store. Like I said, I respond to all the messages.
So you were the one who told me no free shit.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important. I think it's important for your fans to know that it's, because you can always tell when somebody's management runs their Instagram, because it's always just like, hey gang, here's a show in this town, buy tickets now. And there's nothing personal about it. It's just empty and it's vapid. And I think it's important for your fan base to know it's you. It's you. Yeah. And I try to add a personal element to it. Don't get me wrong, I try to inform people. I try to let them know when I'm playing a place. I'll try to let them know when there's a new T-shirt for sale. But I also like them to know, like, you know, that I'm a normal person. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a guy that enjoys the same things they do. I just happen to have a cool job. That's all it is.
And you express that in your songwriting too. I mean, there's a couple themes that kind of picked out of your songwriting that interest me. One, you know, you've talked about your sobriety, something that we share together because
Awesome.
I quit drinking about 2.5 years ago. One of our sponsors is actually a non-alcoholic beer. But you also talk about a couple things that I find really interesting: the evolution of Southern culture.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about that. And then you also there's a few lines you've written over the years where you're basically saying, and I see this in social media too, you're not here just to write songs and shut up.
Yeah.
You're here to kind of express your beliefs, your feelings, and this is your medium to do that, whether it's engaging with your fans on social media or it's within your songwriting, but you're talking about what you believe about culture, about humanity, about
I get paid
drinking.
for my opinions.
Yeah.
I get paid for my observations. My job is to observe society, process those observations, and put it into a 3.5 to 4 minute package to express the same thing that I'm writing about. And everybody's okay with me writing about my darkest secrets, my demons, my addiction, the road, my relationships, my broken relationships. But then a lot of people want to tell you that you can't write about social stuff like politics or the things that you see going wrong in the world, or and you can't pick what you want me to be open about. If you want me to be open and honest about stuff and you enjoy that kind of opening a vein and letting it pour out, like, you have to take everything I decide is important. And some people don't want to do that, and they don't come to shows anymore. Yeah. But for every person that's left, there's 2 people that replaced them because they appreciate that raw honesty, whether or not they agree with me or not. It's about staying honest and staying true to who I am. If I stop talking about it, I bend to someone else's will, and that takes all the art out of it. That takes all of the me out of it. And I think how we've built a fan base, the way we've built it, we didn't build it with a single on the radio. We didn't build it with a massive opening tour from some big band where we went and played arenas with them. We built it because we've been vocal. We've been outspoken, and people know exactly what they're getting. People know me. They feel like they know me when they hear my songs because that's the guy. Like, I'm the guy that wrote those songs, and I'm not shy about expressing my opinions, and so it feels good to have cultivated a fan base that I didn't have to bend for. I didn't have to cut corners. I didn't have to shut up about anything. I got to be open and honest about stuff, and they followed along, and that's been the real joy of this whole thing.
You're listening and or watching to the Loadout Music Podcast. We are with BJ Barham of American Aquarium. We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor.
Hey, this is Aaron Perlett, and for those who have been listening, know that Well-Being Brewing is pretty much my favorite drink in the world because I quit drinking alcohol a couple of years ago and discovered Well-Being, and it really has been my salvation. I am fortunate to be joined by Jeff Stevens, who is the founder and CEO of Well-Being. Jeff, first of all, thank you so much for being a partner with the Loadout, and tell us about, this is such a unique non-alcoholic beer because it actually tastes like great beer.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that because that's the most important thing for us. We invested a lot of money into figuring out how to make great non-alcoholic craft beer, and that was something that I was really interested in. And to have someone like you say, you know what, I can drink this beer and do all the things that I would normally do and don't miss a thing, that makes it all, so great for us.
And it is a craft beer. I mean, I was from the time I was probably 14 or 15, I was a drinker until the time I was about 47.
Yeah.
And I have always been a beer guy, beer and bourbon. And I especially got into more flavorful beers over the past 10 years. But Well-Being, whether it's the Hellraiser Amber or the Well-Being, and you've actually got, or the IPA rather, and you've got a pretty nice group of growing products.
Yeah.
That are pretty impressive. But what's the secret to, when you compare it to some of the other more watered down, imitators. What's the secret to making it so good?
Yeah, there's several ways you can make non-alcoholic beer, and we chose this way called vacuum distillation. So what it allows us to do, and this is the thing that comes through, is we fully ferment the beer. We make it just like you'd normally make alcohol beer. So it's ready to be alcohol beer, and then we take it, put it in a vacuum, lower the boiling point of the beer, and gently remove the alcohol. So what you're left with is all the mouthfeel and the flavor of beer without the alcohol. And I think that's where our products are distinct, is that mouthfeel, that aroma, that flavor that really comes through, versus you can stop the fermentation. That's another method. And those are a little more watery, I think, or just don't quite hold up as well, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being a partner. If you want to sample Wellbeing, you can go to wellbeingbrewing.com and use the code LOADOUT10. LOADOUT10 at checkout, and you will get a discount on Wellbeing from being a Loadout listener. Jeff, thank you so much for being a partner, and thank you so much for making this amazing product.
Aaron, my pleasure. Thank you for drinking it.
And we're back with BJ Barham of American Aquarium. BJ, right before the break, we were talking about what you write about and the impact it has on your fan base. I think where I've seen this most, especially on Lamentations, songs like Better South, Me and Mine, you really kind of dig into things that upset you. And you talked before the break about how you take things and you process them and you write about them. But particularly on that record, I hear a lot of this social analysis of, I think there's a better way, like Better South is, I think it's a fascinating song. And it also reminds me of some of the engagement I see, say, on your Facebook page. But it's, it must be both heartening and disheartening at the same time when you see people that come to your Facebook page and they start bitching about, why don't you shut up and play or whatever. And you're like, come on, man, this is what I do.
Yeah, exactly. For some reason, Plumber Ken or Carpenter John gets to have an opinion on Facebook, but singer-songwriter BJ doesn't. Like, that makes zero sense to me. It's like my job is literally to talk about things that move me in a way that moves other people. Lamentations is a record thematically about the things that break us as people. It's about, if you listen to the songs, it's about a dissolution of a marriage, losing a child, addiction, recovery, financial ruin. I had no idea that I'd be releasing it in the midst of a global pandemic, so throw that on top of it. And the record, I think, really hit home for people. But yeah, there's the social analysis of it. Like as a Southerner, there's this weird dichotomy about being a progressive Southerner and loving your heritage and appreciating the good things about the South, but also being able to take a step back and admitting the flaws and admitting the problems and admitting the missteps, which is what a lot of people don't want to do. They want to put the blinders on and pretend that nothing bad ever happened in the South and that your papaw wasn't a racist asshole. That's just not how it is. And I like to talk about that. I like to talk about the hypocrisy of what I consider like these good old boy Southerners that think that the make America great shit, the like we weren't already great, like what's wrong with it? What's so different now than when your grandpa was alive? Oh, I see what's wrong. Everybody's starting to get like more of a say, more of an equal say, more of an equal shot, and there's a lot of people that don't like that. I like to call that shit out. There's no room for it. There's absolutely no room for it. And if I was a top 40 country singer, I probably wouldn't be allowed to say that kind of stuff, because they don't talk about what moves them, because it affects the bottom line. You let one of those top 40 dudes come out and talk about social justice and let him talk about what he sees wrong in the world, there goes your summer amphitheater tour. There goes your Pepsi sponsorship.
So that's a great point. How do you navigate that? I mean, how do you work within the confines of, you still have to deal with management, record labels, venues. I mean, I got shit for calling a friend in a crowd a douche. She was a friend of mine, like former drummer, like just messing around with him, by a venue GM. How do you deal with that as a performer when you want it? You're trying to be as real as possible.
Well, I own my record label, so that's pretty easy. It's hard to piss off the guy that owns my label. He kind of agrees with me on a lot of stuff. My manager is my manager because she sees what I see.
Yeah.
My manager agrees with a lot of the stuff I say. She, above all, she agrees with my right to say what I feel and express my opinion. I don't give a shit about offending somebody with my opinion. Everyone has an opinion. The only thing that people get mad at is when my opinion differs from theirs. If I was just repeating their ideology in song form, they would champion me as a guy who's speaking the truth, man. He's standing up for what's right. The only reason people tell you to shut up and do your job is because you have a bigger platform than they do, and you're saying something wildly different than what they believe is right. That's the only reason it happens. There's a reason that every redneck that tells me to shut up and sing and keep my opinions to myself champions Aaron Lewis or Ted Nugent. You know, like, man, they're patriots, man. They're standing up for what they believe in. They're brave souls talking about what really matters. The only reason they're brave is because they're just repeating.
Yeah, but you're doing the same thing. You're standing up for what you believe in.
I'm standing up for
it
what
just happens to be different from what they believe.
Exactly. And there's a lot of people that can't take that. There's a lot of people that cannot accept that someone has a megaphone screaming something they disagree with louder than they can scream it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like my aunt can put up some racist shit on her Facebook and only 56 people are going to see it. If I put something up, 50,000 people see it.
Yeah.
That infuriates some people sometimes because my message is spreading a lot further than their message, or my observation is spreading a lot further than their observation.
Yeah.
My silly meme that I put in my Instagram story is being seen by a lot more people than their silly meme, and it frustrates people because they feel that, like, you know, they feel like a minority.
Yeah.
They feel like their voice isn't being heard and that they're being, you know, oppressed. And it's a funny thing in 2021 to see who's really being oppressed and who thinks they're being oppressed. But yeah, I've lost fans over it, but I've gained fans over it.
Sure.
And, like, at the end of the day, I don't want fans that don't want me to speak my truth. I don't want fans that want me just to be quiet about the things that matter because it might stir the pot a little bit. Like, if one less asshole is wearing my name across their chest when they're saying their racist shit in public, cool, awesome. I don't want you to buy the shirt. I don't want you at the show if you're gonna start a fight and call somebody, you know, a lib cuck or some shit like that. Like, get out of here with that nonsense. Like, I've got so many fans that are conservative. I got a lot of fans on the left, and the fans that I really love hanging out with are the ones like, man, I appreciate you being so adamant about your beliefs and so strong and so forthcoming with it. Like, you're not bending to anybody, and, like, I refuse to do that. Like, and I think 15 years in, if I haven't shut up yet, I don't think I'm going to shut up. I don't think I'm going to shut up about it.
Earlier, you were talking about some of your influences. I've heard you talk about Springsteen, his songwriting, especially Darkness on the Edge of Town. You mentioned the Drive-By Truckers. In 2012, you had the opportunity of Jason Isbell produce Burn, Flicker, Die, which is one of your most kind of critically praised records.
Yeah.
But I found it interesting for two things. One, it is a great record, but on the heels of that, you ended up having to do a Kickstarter to fund your next record. But it must have been really rewarding to be able to work. I mean, most people don't think of Jason Isbell as really a member of Drive-By Truckers. They think of Jason as just being who he is. But
yeah, in 2021, it's hard to think of Jason Isbell as the third guitar player in a band.
Yeah, but it must have been really a phenomenal experience, and obviously the results were there.
Yeah.
To work with him, to bring your art to life, and then to get the kind of critical praise really only about 4 or 5 years after you had kind of cemented your band together.
Yeah, it's, at that point, Jason was he wasn't Jason Isbell, critically acclaimed Americana champion. He was just Jason Isbell, my buddy that got kicked out of the Drive-By Truckers. Like, it was a different thing. Like, he hadn't put out Southeastern yet.
Yeah.
Southeastern wouldn't come out until a year after we recorded Burn, Flicker, Die. Like, Jason is still in, he's a B-level Americana songwriter at best. He's a songwriter. He's the one that all of the songwriters knew about, but maybe, your cousin that dug Todd Snyder might not have heard of Jason Isbell just yet. But now it's hard to think of Jason Isbell producing our record.
He's a god now.
He's a made man. Like, the dude is set. He is the voice of a generation tag has been placed upon him. That doesn't get taken away. Like, he's cemented in history as one of the early songwriters that everyone should know. Through his work with the Truckers and obviously his solo work. But at that point in time, he was just our buddy. He's still our friend. Like, he's still the same guy. He's one of the only people I've ever met that got extremely famous, and it didn't change him at all. He's still just a smart-ass, fun guy to be around. You got to think, we made a record with Jason before he got sober, before Southeastern. It was a different person. But through Sobriety and through him finding Amanda and through his success, he's just become a better version of the fun friend we had.
Was it frustrating that was such a good record, and then you had to do a Kickstarter to raise money to produce the Wolves album?
Well, we did a Kickstarter to produce Burn, Flicker, Die.
Okay.
You know, I saw an advantage when crowdfunding first started. And Kickstarter was the first one, and then it got better. It got Pledge Music, and then everybody saw the problems with Pledge Music, and then everybody adapted. So now it's like we have a thing now where we've built our own Pledge Music. Why give someone else 15% to raise money from your fans when you can just raise the money from your fans yourself, as long as you have a proven record of always delivering the product? And so my opinion on this is there's a lot of labels out there that'll sign young, stupid bands and be like, I'll give you all the money you need to make a record, but we get to have this record until you pay us back.
Yeah.
We own this thing until you pay us back. We'll give you all the money in the world. It's a high-interest bank loan. And you're putting your art up for sale, and some of these people aren't going to ever get their art back. But if you let your fans pay for a record up front that funds the entire record-making process, and you don't ever have to worry about giving up the rights to your songs, cutting corners because of cost. Like, it takes a long time to build trust with a fan base to where you can finance a record.
Do you think it's easier to do that in today's environment? Because it used to be, and this is 25 years ago, artists made bank on records. Today, the majority of money is made through touring today.
Unless you own your music. Like, we make plenty of money off our records because we own 100% of the records. You know,
no John Fogerty going on.
yeah. It's where nobody,
Yeah.
like, I own 100% of American Aquarium's catalog. Every record, if you buy a record for $25 from American Aquarium, $25 goes to American Aquarium. So it's like, the people that like to bitch about the record industry are people who have records that are owned by other people.
Yeah.
And yes, I would bitch about that too. If somebody that didn't create the art owns my art in perpetuity until I pay them back the $150,000 they gave me up front, which will never be paid back because the record isn't going to sell that many copies. Instead, I pay for the record up front. It's paid for. It's recouped before the record ever comes out. My press is paid for. My pressing is paid for. My mixing, my mastering. Everything is paid for before I even go into the studio to make the record. That's the new model. That model doesn't exist in 1995. Fast forward to 2020, that model is great for us because my fans are willing to buy a product 9 months in advance, sight unseen, based off of what I've delivered for 15 years. I'm living the dream. I've never worried about paying for a record since Burn, Flicker, Die. Before that, it was like, how do we scrap together a couple $1,000s to get it mixed? Okay, now how do we scrap together a couple $1,000s to get it mastered? Now it's just your fans buy it up front based off of what you've put out, and they just give you basically a record label advance without the bullshit of paying back in advance. It's incredible. A lot of people, one, don't have the fan base to do that with because it takes thousands of people buying a $20 record for you to have a budget. But once you build that, like we pre-sold 11,000 copies of Lamentations. Pre-sold 11,000 copies. That's unheard of for an independent band with 0 radio singles. Radio won't touch us. Yeah. XM will, because they're not really radio. They're real people who get to pick what songs they want to play. Like, that's still a good thing. But, you know, we debuted at #1 on the Americana charts, #2 on the Billboard country charts, #2 on the Billboard rock charts, and we did it all ourselves. We own it all. Like, that's the dream. Like, building your career without anybody else propping you up. It's harder. It takes way longer. But 15 years in, you don't have to answer to anybody. If I want to put out a song saying, fuck everybody, nobody's going to be like, BJ, that's a bad move. I'm just like, man, it's what I'm feeling right now. Here it goes. And it feels good, you know, because if somebody had come along when I was 21 and tried to sign me, fuck yeah, I'd sign that. I'd sign a record. I'd sign away everything at 21. But luckily, nobody came calling when I was 21 or 22 or 23 or 24 until finally I realized I don't need the record label. I don't need that high-interest bank loan up front when I can just make the product myself, which has led to the band's success.
You're listening or watching to the Loadout Music Podcast. We are with BJ Barham from American Aquarium. We'll be right back after this final message. Hey, this is Aaron Perlett. You know what looks better than a 50-year-old moderately overweight man wearing snug-fitting yet amazingly comfortable boxer briefs that look like an American flag with an eagle draped across the front of the crotch? In short, very little. From ball hammocks to bathing suits, from shirts to suits, from pajamas to socks. If you dress like me, and from what I'm seeing on Instagram, you don't, Shynesty.com is your place to shop. So check it out, Shynesty.com, and use the code LOADOUT10. That's LOADOUT and the number 10 at checkout. And we're back with BJ Barham on the Loadout Music Podcast. BJ, we've covered a lot of ground, but a couple things I wanted to ask you about. Your most recent album, of course, it's a cover album. And I've heard you do a couple interviews about it, and the way you and I kind of grew up on similar music. I grew up on classic rock, but then I really got into country in the late 80s and 90s. And that was an interesting time for country because in the 80s, country music was a wreck. And then essentially Garth Brooks, Alan Jackson, people like that saved the industry in the early 90s. But you talk about the singles that you chose for this record as being, I was listening to you on SiriusXM's Outlaw Country. You talked about it as being B-level musicians, or not bands, B-level bands. Yeah. And I looked at all the bands and I was like, that fits. That is exactly what these guys are. And then Mark Miller comes in from Sawyer Brown. And I'm like, oh shit! I wonder if they're in the same room or if this happened to be. Yeah. I was like, that must be kind of weird. And you're like, hey, these guys are B-level artists, and then he walks in. Were you guys in the same room?
No, we weren't in the same room. We were on the same Zoom call. Okay. And I don't think it's one of those things where when I think of A stars from the '90s, it's Garth, it's Alan Jackson, it's Shania, it's the Chicks, it's those artists.
Travis Tritt even.
Yeah. And what I consider A-list 90s country star are people who still have careers today. That's the people that still sell out amphitheaters. Yep. The people that still go to Coliseum after Coliseum and sell it out.
Garth can sell out 80,000 seats.
Exactly. Those are your A-list 90s country. Reba can still sell out places. Brooks and Dunn can still sell out places. Sawyer Brown can't. Travis Tritt can't. Those people are, and I don't mean it as a slight, because in the 90s they were A-listers. Yeah. But I'm talking about today.
Yeah, and all those bands have very good career, right?
Of course.
Still do. Some of them still tour and make.
You got to think, Mark Miller wrote all the Sawyer Brown songs.
Yeah.
Like, he's the sole songwriter on, like, Some Girls, which has been called the biggest song of the 1990s based on radio play. And he owns 100%. He owns all the songwriting credits.
And there were some songs you had.
Like, he's Scrooge McDuckin in a room, like, just full of gold coins that he jumps into every day based off of that one song. But I wanted to pick songs from my childhood that weren't necessarily number one hits. Don't get me wrong. Some of those songs, should have been a Cowboy, Some Girls. They were definitely number one hits. But we wanted to pick, they had to be top 10 singles. Yeah. Every one of those songs is a top 10 single. And most of those songs are not the number one song from the artist. The best-selling song from the artist.
Probably the only exception are, Sawyer Brown, and then Should Have Been a Cowboy still arguably could be, because it launched Toby Keith's career.
Yeah, I'm wondering which one was the most successful, but like I picked that because
it's a great song.
And Toby Keith wrote that song by himself.
Yeah.
There's no co-write on that. Toby Keith came to Nashville with that song in his back pocket. And I did that just to prove that Toby Keith wasn't always a bootlicker.
Yeah,
it's,
I was going to say douchebag. But
the faux patriot guy that cashed in on, national devastation.
Well, that song still holds up today, too.
Yeah, that's to this day. And I told people, I'm like, we recorded Toby Keith so you can listen to Toby Keith without having to listen to Toby Keith. Like, that's why we did it. And it's a good song. And I don't care where you stand on the political spectrum or whether or not you like the guy. It's a good song. And that song, I didn't record that song because it was a number one hit. I didn't record that song because it was a great song. I recorded it because I have vivid memories of sitting in the back of my dad's S10 Blazer, driving around, screaming that song at the top of my lungs.
Yeah.
90s country taught me a foundational lesson on melody, on song structure, on how to deliver a quality story in less than 4 minutes. None of those songs are longer than 3.5 minutes. None of them. Yeah. They're all to the point, 2 to 3 verses, maybe a bridge if you're lucky, and just a powerhouse chorus repeated 3 to 4 times. It's how you write a catchy story song. And that's what country music's got away from today. They don't tell stories, and if they do, it's the same story as the other 12 songs in rotation.
Well, today, pop country music is just, it's all about technology, and it's pop. I mean, if you want to listen to country music, it's like real country music, which is what the Outlaw Country brand is that interesting dissection that happened in the late 60s that split the industry into two, essentially. It's so hard to find it, and there are so many bands. We've talked about them, and you guys, Jason Isbell. I mean, you can go on and on and on. We've had a bunch of these. One of the people you're touring with, who I think is like one of the rising stars in the industry, Morgan Wade.
Yeah.
I think the absolute world of her, and she was actually on our first season here. But it's fascinating what's happened in the industry. I do want to ask you a little bit more about your sobriety, especially because I know so much about what the process of going through it. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it shaped you, I'm sure, as a human being, and then also the impact that, therefore, subsequently it's had on your songwriting, and just you as a musician, as a bandmate?
I had my last drink August 31st, 2014. So I'm coming up on 7 years of sobriety. I had a point where there was a very definitive moment where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. It was taking its toll on my personal relationships. It was taking its toll on my actual relationship with my wife, who was then my girlfriend. It wasn't worth throwing everything away to have fun every night. So I made a decision. I was at Magnolia Motor Lounge, Fort Worth, Texas. I played a show, went to the bar, took a triple shot of Jameson, stood up on a bar stool and said, I'm never drinking again. And I just didn't drink anymore. Just cold turkey, no more. I don't think it's a coincidence that my career took off after I got sober. Pre-Wolves, we were one of those bands that showed promise, but always fucked it up. Always got in our own way. Always tripped ourselves up anytime we were building momentum. After sobriety, I was much more focused. I wasn't being hamstrung by myself anymore. It was all hands on deck moving towards the same goal instead of the little angel on my left trying his best to make it in the music business and the little devil on my right completely making everything fall apart.
Like Animal House? Fuck her brains out.
Yeah.
Oh, no!
Yeah, it's one of those things where like that it wasn't there anymore. It was just everybody was focusing on how do I move my career forward? How do I write the best songs I can possibly do? And how can I be a better boss? And by that point, I think I'd ruined the relationship with the band I had at the time, which was what we refer to affectionately these days as the old band.
Was that part of, you said in 2017 everybody walked away. Was that part of it, you think?
No. 3 years, at that point, 2 years of sobriety didn't make up for the 5 years of me being a shitty boss, asshole, getting drunk, telling them that they were replaceable, telling them that, I'd get hammered, and if somebody fucked something up, I'd be like, man, you're totally replaceable, or like I'd say something mean about them, or I'd say I was insecure.
Sure.
I took my insecurities, I drank because I was insecure, and I took out those insecurities on people that I loved. I took out those insecurities on people that I considered my best friends. And that was another thing about sobriety, was like, if I consider these guys my best friends and I treat them this way, like, what does that say about me?
Yeah.
But yeah, I ruined those relationships, and there was no coming back from them. Like, they stayed on as long as they could put up with me. And by the end of it, I burned them out. Not only was I a shitty boss, we were doing 300 shows a year. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
Like, looking back, it's like, there's no way 37-year-old me could do 200 shows right now. We were doing 300. We did 307, 308, and 306, and 11, 12, and 13.
Yeah.
Like, bands in town named us the hardest working band in the world all 3 of those years.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you run a band down, is play every shitty menu venue from here to California twice a year, every year for 3 years, and there was no money, there was no crowds, we were just killing ourselves. driving 8-9 hours a day to play for 10 people. And then when they quit, you know, it sucks because those guys helped build American Aquarium.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I'll never deny that. But it was almost as soon as I surrounded myself with a new batch of guys that weren't burnt out, that didn't look at me like the asshole. They just knew me as like the boss that was sober, that was kind, that was wanted the we instead of me. The career took off. We had this. So Burn, Flicker, Die was the first time where we had the career shift. People started paying attention. Writers started writing about us. Shows started selling out. Some notoriety started coming. Things change is when that next career, we went into the next gear. And we moved from a van and trailer into a bus. And bigger shows were selling out. We were selling out theaters at this point. That's a cool feeling. That's a neat feeling.
Yeah.
And all that happened when there was new blood in the band. They were hungry. They'd never experienced the negative side of me. They just got to join a band that they liked the songs, they shared the vision, and they were hungry. I hadn't burned them out yet. I hadn't driven them around in a 15-passenger van for a decade. And that's when we saw a huge growth in our band, was what we call now the new band. 2017 on is, it's the pre-things change and the things change after things change. Those are the two kind of entities of the band for me, is Drunk, Road Warriors, finding our voice. Post Things Change is very focused songwriting. The band is very tight. It's a different thing. It was where you saw us, like I said, we kicked it into 6th gear, and we've been in 6th gear since, looking on a way to develop a 7th.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to wrap things.
Killer.
DJ Barham, thank you so much for being on the Loadout. Really appreciate it. You've been listening to the Loadout Music Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Perlett. You can find us at loadoutmusic.com. As always, we are presented by Wellbeing Brewing and Shynesty. Thanks again for listening or watching. We'll see you next time. Hey folks, if you made it this far, and judging by our numbers you haven't, thanks for listening to the Loadout Music Podcast. You can always find us at loadoutmusic.com and wherever you like to get your podcasts, like iTunes or SoundCloud. And of course, as always, thanks to Gaslight Studios for hosting us. Have a good one.